has 4 5G bars in more places. And now, when you switch, you can get iPhone 13 on us.
This is music and news.
Other things like, say, Reddit or Quora, or there's a lot of different places where you can figure out. So my niche started going after that sort of thing.
This is Channel 420. Channel 420. The newest music, Channel 420. Channel 420. Listen to Channel 420 all day. Channel 420. 420.
1,562. A new way to pay for college. Update.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Apple Card. It's time to reboot your credit card with Apple Card. It gives you up to 3% unlimited daily cash back on everything you buy. Apply now in the Wallet app on iPhone and start using it right away, subject to credit approval.
This is Planet Money from NPR.
As we enter a new school year, it is worth noting that college is as expensive, if not more expensive, than ever. And inflation is not helping that. But, 3 years ago, we did talk about this novel, seemingly new, to the United States at least, this new way of paying for college. Income share agreements. Now, if you have no idea what an income share agreement is, do not worry. We have an episode to play for you as some background, but we wanted to play that episode now so that we could give you a bit of an update now that this income share agreement product has been around and in the world and in the United States now for a little bit of time. Here is that original episode from about 3 years ago. Lauren Neuwirth is a junior at Purdue University. She studies biological engineering and food processing sciences, which means she knows a lot about how food works.
As a technical expert, is there some artificial flavor that's just like where they just nailed it?
I would say like banana. Banana's actually pretty cool from a chemical standpoint. It's like a volatile compound.
Lauren obviously is super into this stuff. And she knew that Purdue was a good place to get into the food engineering industry. But she couldn't figure out how she was going to pay for Purdue.
Yeah, it was extremely stressful. Like, I was telling Kenny before, every time I go into financial aid, I just start crying because it's just so much money. And, I come from, a single-parent household. So it's hard to rationalize, asking my mom for, extra money.
When Lauren went off to Purdue, her mom gave her $30,000. That was her college fund.
On top of that, she was able to get some government-backed student loans. She's gotten paid internships in the summer. But all of those things combined are not nearly enough to pay her way through school.
So I went to financial aid, and I was, all set to basically, join the Army because they said that they would pay for my school. So, I basically went in there and I was like, okay, I need some money or I'm calling the Army recruiter back and I'm joining the Army because I don't know what else to do and school's $30,000 a year.
And that was when someone at the financial aid office told her about a new way for students to pay for college. It was so new that even the person at the financial aid office didn't know all of the details.
They said, they didn't know a ton about it and that it was kind of a new program and that I should, go home and kind of look into it. And then I did, and I was like, yeah, I think this does sound better than the military. So I applied, and I got approved, and then that's how I've been, paying for my last 2 years of school.
Purdue gave Lauren a bunch of money, tens of thousands of dollars. It's not a scholarship. It's not a traditional loan. There's no set amount of money that Lauren has to pay back.
Instead, Lauren had to promise that she will give Purdue a chunk of her income for years after she graduates. The more she makes, the more Purdue makes. It's kind of like Lauren sold stock in herself. Hello and welcome to Planet Money. I'm Jacob Goldstein.
And I'm Kenny Malone. Today on the show, this idea of selling stock in yourself or something like it has been kicking around for decades. Now, it's finally starting to happen.
Support for this NPR podcast and the following message come from Apple Card. It's time to reboot your credit card with Apple Card. It gives you up to 3% daily cash back on everything you buy and offers all the privacy and security you expect from Apple. Plus, it doesn't have a single fee. Apply now in the Wallet app on iPhone and start using it right away. Subject to credit approval. Variable APRs range from 13.24 to 24.24% based on credit worthiness. Rates as of August 1st, 2022.
On the podcast Rough Translation, a cat in Ukraine brings the war home to a small town in New York that's hanging on every update.
What was going to happen to the cat?
And local news there would never look the same. That's on Rough Translation from NPR.
This thing Lauren Neuwirth did, it is called an income share agreement. And it is a new way to help pay for college. But it is based on a pretty old idea. One of the people who helped kind of rediscover this and dust it off is a man named Miguel Palacios.
Hello?
Jacob, hi.
Hey, Miguel, how are you?
Good, thank you. How are you doing?
Miguel is a professor of finance at the University of Calgary. He grew up in Colombia, and in the mid-1990s, he heard about this weird thing happening in the news involving David Bowie.
We must have died alone.
So, David Bowie raised capital for himself, and the special thing about this capital raising was that he pledged his future earnings.
This was in 1997, and by this point, David Bowie had been a rock star for like 30 years. He had this huge catalog of perpetual hits. Under Pressure, Starman, The Man Who Sold the World. And every time somebody bought an album or played one of those songs on the radio, Bowie got a little money. He got royalties.
So what Bowie decided to do at this point was instead of get a little money every year, he wanted a lot of money now. So he said to investors, if you give me a lot of money now, I will give you a chunk of my royalties for the next 10 years.
And it worked. Investors gave Bowie $55 million, and in return, they got a nice steady stream of income for the next decade.
When Miguel Palacios heard about this Bowie thing, he thought immediately that this kind of deal would be great, not just for rock stars, but for regular people. In particular, he thought of college students.
And it all came from experiencing the fate of several classmates when I was an undergrad student who were doing okay, but basically had to drop off because they couldn't survive financially. And these people, I knew they were highly capable, they were very talented, they were plausibly much more talented than I was. And they were giving up on a degree that in Colombia is very, very valuable.
So you heard about the Bowie bonds, and you thought about your friends, your classmates who had to drop out because they didn't have enough money. And what did you think?
I thought they should be able to do something like what David Bowie did.
Not exactly like what David Bowie did, but Miguel wanted to give college students a choice that companies have had for hundreds of years. If you're a company and you need money, you basically have two options. Option number one, debt. Get a loan, sell a bond. If you do this, you have to pay back everything you borrowed plus interest.
Option two, equity. Sell stock to investors. If you do this, investors, people, give you money and you get to keep it. This is not a loan. You don't have to pay it back, but the people who gave you the money, who invested in you, get a share of your future profits. The more money you make, the more money you have to give your investors.
Ordinary people don't have this choice. If you're a regular person and you need money, all you get is option one. You can borrow money if somebody is willing to lend it to you. If you don't want to borrow money, or if there's nobody who is willing to lend you money, you're out of luck. That is why Miguel's friends who couldn't get loans had to drop out of school.
So Miguel keeps studying this idea. He goes off to grad school and he learns that people have tried sort of similar things in the past, but not really what Miguel was thinking of. He also finds a couple people trying to get companies off the ground doing this sort of thing in the 90s, but nobody's getting very far.
And at some point, Miguel happens to come across this chapter in a book by Milton Friedman, the famous economist.
Randomly. So I was reading Capitalism and Freedom. And
As one does.
As one does. and it was there, right? So there's this chapter, and there it is. It's laid out very clearly, the whole idea explained.
Friedman just says it. We should have a way that you can give a student money in exchange for a cut of his or her future earnings.
So you just happen to be reading this book at this moment?
Yes, serendipitously.
What did you think when you came upon this in the book?
two things. On one hand is, I guess it's not an original idea. On the other hand, cool. Milton Friedman also thought it was a good idea.
Yeah. The big moment for Miguel came when he met a guy named Felipe Vergara, also Colombian, very entrepreneurial, and interested in education.
Yeah, I described what I was writing about.
Okay.
And he thought it was very interesting. But this is where the entrepreneur is different from the PhD student. I was thinking that I would spend several years studying and learning and then designing. And he said, why don't we do it? Let's try to have the first contracts by next month. And that was the birth of Lumni.
Lumni is the company that Felipe and Miguel founded to do this thing Miguel had been dreaming of, to make income share agreements for students.
They did a little pilot program in Chile where Miguel had worked when he was in his 20s. They funded 6 students, $10,000 in total.
Well, that went great. And that was, say, the beginnings of a track record that allowed Lumni to start raising more capital to finance other students.
That was in 2001. Today, almost 20 years later,
it operates in Colombia, Peru, Chile, Mexico, and to this point, something of 10,000 students financed through these contracts.
In all, they've provided about $50 million, 5-0, in financing. And the investors who've put money in, they are getting paid back.
But Lumni has not really cracked the United States market yet, a place where obviously people have huge problems paying for college. After the break, income share agreements come to the U.S.
Support for NPR and the following message come from Avalara. Remember when you rarely had to pay sales tax for stuff you bought on the internet? Now, states can collect sales tax on internet sales. If your business sells online, Avalara can make your life easier with real-time tax rate calculation and automatic return filing. Find out how Avalara can help you save time and reduce risk at avalara.com/NPR. Avalara. Tax compliance done right.
If you've been paying attention in Planet Money Summer School, then you know that the American business cycle is a beast. Big booms, devastating busts, and it's kind of wild to think that pre-2008...
Some people became perhaps a bit arrogant and they said, we have tamed the business cycle. The business cycle is no longer...
last words.
Yeah, exactly.
The business cycle is dead.
You know.
Of course, they were wrong. The business cycle has not gone anywhere. And something is fueling it.
This incredible rise in financialization of the economy.
We will tell you what that means with economist Atif Mian. That's in our next bonus episode for Planet Money Plus subscribers. If that's you, then thank you for your support. If it's not, it could be. There is a link in our episode notes where you can subscribe.
Planet Money with San Andreas Radio.
All right, one moment. He's still in the meeting right now.
Fine.
One moment, please.
Media who are taking note. Purdue received a record number of applications.
Purdue University, remember, is the school that is using an income share agreement to fund part of the education of Laura Neuwirth, the food engineer who we talked to at the beginning of the show.
Whatever your pursuit.
Mitch Daniels.
Mitch Daniels is the president of Purdue.
Hi, it's Jacob Goldstein at NPR.
I'm so sorry to hold you up.
Oh, no problem.
Purdue, as far as we can tell, is the first big 4-year university in the U.S. to try income share agreements. And this happened because in 2015, Mitch Daniels went to Washington to testify at a congressional hearing on higher education. He talked about a bunch of different issues, and just in passing, he mentioned income share agreements.
It was almost a throwaway line, but as soon as the hearing was over, I was swarmed with, first of all, reporters who were curious about the concept. And then shortly thereafter, I began to hear from people who had hoped that somewhere, someone would try to get this concept airborne.
So Mitch went back to Purdue and asked a team of people to figure out if Purdue could do this. And if so, what students might benefit.
And just to be super clear here, let's step back for one moment. College is ridiculously expensive, and income share agreements are not going to solve that.
Also, there are better ways to pay for college if you can swing them. Government-backed student loans are better than income share agreements for most students. Also, grants and scholarships are obviously better for students than income share agreements.
But for lots of students like Laura Neuwirth, Grants and scholarships and government-backed loans and summer jobs all put together are not enough to pay for college. Those students often wind up taking out additional private loans. And for those students, Purdue decided income share agreements might be a good option.
All I know is there are millions of students who are taking very expensive loans who might be candidates for this and who might find it to their advantage.
Purdue launched its income share agreement program in 2016, and so far, they've funded about 500 students. And the details of how this program works are really interesting. So we're just going to run through some of those details to explain how it actually works for students like, say, Lauren Newworth.
I printed out all my forms that I signed and everything last night, and I was kind of like,
yeah, you have it there.
Yeah, I'm pulling it out.
Riffling through it. Great.
The school gave Lauren $50,000, and she promised to pay roughly 15% of her income for 8 years after she graduates.
So the more you make, the more you have to pay.
Yes.
But also the less you make, the less you have to pay.
Yeah, but I mean, we're hoping to make a good amount of money.
One of the most interesting things about the program is that the percentage of income that students have to promise to pay depends on what their major is. We talked about this with Mary Claire Cartwright, who manages the Purdue program.
I mean, we know that a chemical engineer's traditional salary out of school is going to be different than, let's say, an English major.
And by different, you mean way higher.
Correct. I mean, for most people, right?
I say that as an English major, yes.
Right.
Here is the thinking behind how Purdue set this program up. They want everybody who participates to ultimately pay back the same amount. Now, English majors are probably going to earn less, so if they want money now, they have to promise a higher percentage of their income in the future.
On the other hand, engineers are probably going to earn more, so they are on the hook for a lower percentage of their future income.
And this feels like, I don't know, a little weird, maybe a little judgy. Most schools, for example, don't charge different tuition rates for different majors. They just set one average for everybody. So why not do that with income share agreements?
So you could decide to just take the average income of all graduates and say, okay, we're going to base the number based on that.
Sure.
No matter what you're majoring in, we're going to charge you based on that. I mean, that's an option.
It is. But it would be one that might cause there to be more adverse selection into the cohort.
So you mean that if you average it out, all the English majors would say, like, sure, that sounds like a sweet deal.
Right.
And all the chemical engineering majors would be like,
I'm not
no,
so
thanks,
sure.
I think I'm just going to take a loan.
Right. Correct.
Uh-huh.
Correct.
That's interesting.
Adverse selection is this general kind of problem that occurs when exactly the wrong kind of people sign up for something. And one concern with income share agreements is that even when you charge different majors different rates, you could still have this adverse selection problem.
Yeah, like say I'm an English major and I'm planning to go to law school and get some high-paying lawyer job. I'm going to make a lot more than the average English major. So for me, an income share agreement is probably not a good deal, right? I'm going to be on the hook for a lot of money. On the other hand, if I'm going to go, say, be a teacher, get a good job, but one where I don't make a ton of money, in that case, an income share agreement may be a good deal for me.
Now, Purdue doesn't have any control over what you do after you graduate. They're not going to tell you to take the higher paying job over a lower paying job.
But there are some terms in the contract to catch, like super slackers.
I mean, if someone told me, you're going to pay a percentage of your income for the 10 years after you graduate, I would initially be like, great. So I'm going to Europe for at least 2 of those years.
Great. We want people to experience that, and you've paused the contract because you're not seeking employment.
Paused the contract. The students who do this, the students like Lauren who get income share agreements, are on the hook for 8 years after they graduate. It's like there's this clock running down. But Purdue will stop the clock if say, Lauren decides, to bum around Europe, or for that matter, to go to grad school.
On the other hand, if Lauren gets fired and she's looking for a job, the clock keeps running. And since she doesn't have income, she doesn't have to pay.
On the other hand, if Lauren becomes, some food tech superstar, if she becomes a banana billionaire, she does not have to kick back 15% of that huge windfall to Purdue. She does not have to give them, $100 million. There is a cap on what she and everybody in the program has to pay. And that cap is 2.5 times the amount that Purdue gave her in the first place. In Lauren's case, it's $125,000.
After she graduates, she'll have to tell Purdue, or the company that's running this program for Purdue, how much she is making. And if Lauren just refuses to pay, they can come after her and demand that she pay 2.5 times the amount they gave her in the first place, no matter how much she's making at that point. So those are some of the terms that Lauren Neuwirth signed up for.
How do you feel about that?
I mean, honestly, not great because like no one wants money taken out of their check every month. But at the same time, like maybe I don't make a lot coming out of college. Okay, well then we're still doing fine. I'm not going to like default on my loans.
The first students in the program have already graduated. They're making payments, seems to be going well. But really, it is too early to say how this is going to work. You know, will students like Lauren feel good about it in the end? Will the people who put money into the program get their money back? How profitable will it be? Will it be the kind of thing that draws in big money private investors, or is it going to remain this kind of semi-philanthropic niche thing?
Okay, Kenny in the present now again, and everything that you just heard, so that was reported a little more than 3 years ago. And we figured that now was a perfect time to check in on some of those very big but very specific questions that we ended our original episode with. And a couple of days ago, we hopped on a video call with...
Hello, can you hear me?
Lauren Neuwirth. Hello, Lauren.
I'll get my video going.
She was sitting in a very nice office, but was wearing this like serious, almost air traffic controller uniform. Are you at your full-time job? Are we seeing you?
Yes. So I have my fire-resistant clothing on, so...
Fire-resistant clothing.
Yeah, so I work in a corn mill, and that flour can be kind of explosive. So, yeah, that's what I got.
Yeah, apparently flour particles can get in the air, and then if there's a spark, or if it gets really hot, I guess, very bad news. But good news, Lauren did graduate in 2020 and found a great job. It's in Illinois, in the food industry, the industry she was so passionate about.
Yeah, so basically we take in like raw corn from farmers, and then we grind it down into flour and smaller pieces of corn, and then send it off to, Frito-Lay and General Mills and stuff like that.
So when we bite into a Frito-Lay, can we thank you in part for like the wonderful texture of the corn molecules or particles in that chip?
Yeah, absolutely. It's our job to grind it to the right granulation.
Now, before we get to some other updates about Lauren, let's look at some of those big questions that Jacob was floating at the end of our original episode. And to be clear, since we focused on Purdue's program, we asked Purdue specifically about all of this stuff. And let's start with this question.
Will the people who put money into the program get their money back?
Now, we talked to a couple people at Purdue, and they say that the first thing you need to know is that the vast majority of people who put money in, that is Purdue and some philanthropic organizations. It's their money. And yeah, they are getting their money back, I suppose. Meaning that on average, enough students are graduating and then landing good enough jobs so that when they pay back that like percentage of their salary, the income share agreement program can keep running. And by the way, Purdue says that they are up to about 1,500 students now on income share agreements. Next income share agreement question from 3 years ago, Jacob.
How profitable will it be?
And answer, not necessarily super profitable. So for Purdue, the income share fund is making somewhere between 4 and 7% per year, which is way better than, most of our bank's savings accounts would have been over the last 6 years. But, the S&P was returning like double or triple that over the same time period. Which brings us to the next question here.
Will it be the kind of thing that draws in big money private investors, or is it going to remain this kind of semi-philanthropic niche thing?
Yeah, Purdue tells us that in their case, about 95% of the money that funds income share agreements comes from the university and other philanthropic organizations. And then there is that remaining 5% that is spread across, quote, a multi-strategy hedge fund, one family office, and then 5 individual investors. So yeah, a small amount of private money has come into this, but it is a very small amount. And there's one additional update that we should mention, because there have been some headlines that make it seem like Purdue is shutting this program down. It says maybe they're suspending this program, and that's partially true. So Purdue says that it is temporarily not issuing new income share agreements, but just for this coming school year. And Purdue tells us that this is a problem that is completely caused by a change in vendors, as in, they had to switch companies that collect payments, and this is what caused the problem. And so Purdue plans to keep issuing income share agreements when they are able to do that again. But all the existing agreements are still in place, which brings us to our final question.
Will students like Lauren feel good about it in the end?
We figured this one we can just ask to Lauren Neuwirth.
I'm just grateful that you did reach out to me again, because I think that I definitely had a different opinion before I was graduating. But now after I am graduating, I feel like I see the other side of it, and it isn't as positive.
So you may recall that the income share agreement Lauren made with Purdue was as follows. When she graduated, she would have to pay 15% of her salary to Purdue for the first 8 years of her working life. And Lauren ended up landing a very good job. And pretty soon, she was making about $70,000 a year.
I recently got a raise, as in like a few days ago, and now that's awesome, but I have to report that and pay more money a month. So I'm going to be paying, I think it's like $923 a month.
Yeah, something, and it comes out to something like around $11,000 a year that you'll be paying back to the income share agreement.
It's a lot.
Lauren says she is now paying more per month than if she had just taken out a more traditional student loan back in 2019. But this will be her reality for the next 5 years of her working life. And if her career really skyrockets, she'll pay even more. She may even end up hitting the maximum payback amount for this income share, which is 2.5 times the original amount Purdue gave her. Maybe. On the other hand, of course, Lauren is only paying a lot because she is doing so well professionally. If she had struggled to find a job or barely made any money out of school, she would owe Purdue 15% of zero or not very much, which is $0 or not very much money.
My boyfriend is a pilot, and
cool.
We've had the conversation where he's probably going to be laid off at some point in his life. And so an income share agreement would probably be really good for him. But in retrospect, I wish that I would have just bit the bullet and maybe taken another private loan or some sort of more traditional route, just because I think then every time I would get a raise, I could throw, extra money at my loan and actually pay it down quicker.
And this is an interesting wrinkle that I maybe had not thought about when we originally reported this story. It's kind of a PR wrinkle, really, for income share agreements. The most successful graduates are going to be the ones who end up paying the most, and therefore they may be the most likely to question their decision to enter into the agreement. Just as Lauren Neuwirth is doing from her great but potentially explosive new corn job, where, by the way, she does seem to be getting used to the steel-toed boots, hard hat, and fire-resistant everything.
Yep, I just wear it all the time.
Have there been fires that you needed resistance to?
Thankfully, no.
All right, well, I will certainly think of you every time I eat a corn-based snack, and that's wonderful, and it makes me so happy that you're working in food. It's really great.
Yeah, thank you.
I guess we should say one additional update from the original episode. The president of Purdue, Mitch Daniels, just retired as president. No longer the president of Purdue. If you have any specific questions about the economy at this very important economic moment, we would love to know what you're thinking about, what you're wondering about. You can email us. We are planetmoney@npr.org. We're also on social media @planetmoney. This episode was originally produced by Darian Woods and edited by Bryant Erstadt. This update was produced by Willa Rubin and edited by Molly Messick. It was engineered by Gilly Moon. Our executive producer is Alex Goldmark. I'm Kenny Malone. This is NPR. Thanks for listening.
I'm Johnny. This is San
Playing
Andreas
Summer
Radio
School
with
4,
with Planet
Inflation
Money.
and Drinking Buddies.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Spectrum Business, who is boosting their internet starting speeds to 300 megabits per second
San
without
Andreas
increasing
Radio.
the price. Plus, Spectrum Business has internet speeds up to a gig available. Learn more at spectrum.com/business.
San Andreas Radio.
This is Planet Money.
This is San Andreas Radio.
welcome to Planet Money Summer School, your one-stop shop for
San
learning
Andreas
about
Radio
all
with
things
Planet Money.
economic. I'm Stacey Vanek Smith, and climbing our way out of the caves of macroeconomics, I'm joined by our two economics spelunkers. I don't know why I wrote it this way, but I did. Kristen Brody and Luigi Zingales. Hey, guys.
Hi there.
Hi there.
This is episode 4 of Summer School, and today's topic is one that is very familiar to most of us. Prices, how much stuff costs. And this might not sound like such a big deal, kind of small potatoes, but it is a really big deal because if prices start rising or falling a lot, it can create a spiral that can destroy a whole economy. One of the big worries that economists and politicians have about the economy is always inflation, which is just prices rising across an economy. But specifically, people worry about an inflationary spiral. Kristen, Luigi, would one of you mind jumping in and defining what an inflationary spiral is?
I've got the definition.
Go, Kristen, go.
So it's a situation where price increases and then wages increase because people need more money to be able to pay the higher prices. And so then we see prices increase again, and it just goes on and on.
And this is what is known as the dreaded wage price spiral. So basically, prices start going up, people start asking for higher pay to be able to afford to pay those higher prices, and then companies start paying out more in wages to their workers. And so they raise prices on the stuff they sell to help pay for those higher wages, et cetera, et cetera. And this spiral is considered to be a true economic monster when it really gets going. This really strikes fear into the hearts of economists and politicians. Luigi, why is this?
I think that high level of inflation, especially unexpected inflation, create a lot of social unrest because there is a massive redistribution of income in the economy, and that is generally quite disruptive. So inflationary spiral, if it keeps rising, then you lose confidence the currency you're using, and savings becomes dramatically reduced, and long-term planning becomes extremely difficult, and so on and so forth. So the disruption in the economy can be substantive, especially when you enter the double-digit inflation range.
Or even more than double digits. So when inflation spirals out of control, it can lead to what is known as hyperinflation. Hyperinflation is when prices are rising at a rate of 1,000% or more per year, which means, for example, that like a $3 coffee would cost more than $33 by the end of 1 year. And we've never experienced anything like that in this country, thank goodness. But countries all over the world have suffered this. And when it happens, it is just a terribly destructive force. And we, in fact, are about to hear a story about hyperinflation and the terrible effects it had on the people and the government of Brazil. Kristen, Luigi, is there anything that people should listen for with the story?
Yeah, it's important just to think about how much time and how much money had to be invested to come up with different ways to try to deal with inflation, and just how they had people think about the value of their money so that they didn't lose faith in the economy.
The other thing that I would like them to listen for is this aspect that inflation, by a certain extent, is a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the definition of inflation is a lot of money chasing a limited amount of goods. And if you expect prices to go up, then you rush to buy the goods today, and that tends to push the prices up even more.
Also, like you say, Luigi, it is always so fascinating to me the psychological element of inflation, because one of the ingredients of an inflationary spiral, which is inflation getting out of control, is people thinking that they're in an inflationary spiral. And in fact, that is a big part of the story that we are about to hear. It is about hyperinflation in Brazil from the 80s and 90s. It was reported by Hannah Jaffe-Walt back in 2010, and we'll hear that right after the break.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Harvard Business Review, bringing some of the best minds in business to topics from diversity in the workplace to returning to the office. Get unlimited access starting at less than $9 per month at hbr.org/NPR.
On the podcast Rough Translation, a cat in Ukraine brings the war home to a small town in New York that's hanging on every update.
What was going to happen to the cat?
And local news there would never look the same. That's on Rough Translation from NPR.
15 years ago, money basically had no value in Brazil. The inflation rate in Brazil in 1990 was about 80% a month. So imagine just going to the store, like one day eggs will cost $1 in the store. And then tomorrow they would be $1.02. And the next day they'd be $1.04. By the end of the month, they would have almost doubled. And by the end of the year, if inflation continues, eggs would be $1,000. So that was what things were like in Brazil in the 1980s and the early 90s. And it is what they would still be like right now today if it were not for some unlikely heroes. The most unlikely group of national heroes you can imagine: 4 former drinking buddies from grad school with a crazy plan who were suddenly put in charge of the country's biggest economic crisis ever. But before we meet them and hear their story, let's paint a picture of the problem that they set out to solve. So remember, prices were going up every day in the 80s and early 90s. And if you think about what that actually means in the supermarket, they had to change prices every day. Caetano Ferrari, this flirtatious 75-year-old in Sao Paulo that I met, remembers that that was someone's job, to walk the aisles and change the prices.
There's a guy who changed the sticker. Blah, 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 blah. Huh? You pass the guy and you buy things.
Wait, you would walk by the guy? You would, like, get in front of him?
You run
in front of him?
In front of the guy and buy things like that.
So that you could get to the goods before he changed the price?
Yes, like that.
Inflation was a pain for people who shopped in stores as well as for people who ran those stores. Because the problem is you can only possibly know that inflation was 80% a month in retrospect. At the time it's actually happening, you have no idea. This is one of the pernicious effects of sustained high inflation. You assume, because prices were going up in the past, that they're going to continue going up in the future, but you don't really know how much. How much do you tell the sticker man to raise prices by? So every business in Brazil had to develop different strategies. So some people just set a number for what prices will be. They just said prices will go up 2% every day. Other store owners would go and just peek in the store down the road and see what their prices were and copy them. And others would look at the exchange rate with the dollar. So people like Isaac Guerkman, he ran a textile factory in a row of textile businesses. And his method was looking at the exchange rate with the dollar combined with good old-fashioned collusion. Every morning, Isaac would get together with the other textile guys.
In Brazil, it's very common that you start your day having a glass of coffee, and we start talking the weekend and how our football team has done, and then someone probably would say, how much you're gonna start, are you gonna charge, what is the dollar exchange rate? And somebody else would say, was $9, now it's $10, so I have to increase my prices 10%. And, it's not an exactly science.
Brazil's problems with inflation all started in the 1950s. The government wanted to build a new capital in Brasilia, and they wanted nice buildings, fancy architects, and didn't have the savings to pull it off. So it created the money to do it. Now, this is an option countries are often tempted to take. They can print money to pay for things they can't afford. The problem, of course, is inflation. So if there's $100 in the economy and you create 100 more, now every dollar is worth half as much. That's inflation. And in Brazil, inflation continued for the next 5 decades. Year after year, Brazilian money was worth less and less. And this causes all sorts of problems, not just with the sticker man. Say you get a $1,000 bonus and you put that money in your drawer. A year later, it's worth half as much. So the minute you get paid, the clock is ticking on your money. I talked to one man who told me he used to have nightmares about his money sitting still on his dresser, just losing value. A beer manufacturer told me he stopped making beer because making beer just takes too long. You buy all the grains and hops, and by the time it was brewed, everything was worth so much less. So by the 1980s, inflation was the number one political issue. And so began the plans to fix it. Now, It turns out the best person to talk to about this is Maria Leopoldina Bierenbeck, because Maria can take you through a detailed history of each president's failed plan to stop inflation. But you have to ask Maria each question twice, because the first time she always answers like this.
I don't know, because I never had to do anything. I was just a plain housewife and mother.
And then Maria will proceed to be the most knowledgeable person you will speak to on any topic. Okay, so first up, President Sarney in 1985. And President Sarney's solution to inflation was simple. Businesses are raising prices, make that illegal. There was a price freeze.
And you know what happened? People hid the merchandise. And you couldn't buy anything because they wanted the prices to grow up, because the situation was a fantasy. It was not real. You couldn't find meat at the butchers.
Because they just weren't buying meat to sell? Why couldn't you?
They hid the cattle.
Really?
Yes, you can do that here. It's a very large country, you know.
So they hid the cattle waiting for the price freeze to go away?
Yes.
The main problem with this plan, of course, is you can't just freeze prices and not deal with the underlying problem, the fact that the government is still creating money, which causes inflation. So that was the next guy's idea. President Collor in 1990, he thought, okay, I'll just stop creating so much money. Inflation will eventually go down. Now, here is the problem with that. It has to do with the country's banks. If you were in the small minority of Brazilians who had enough money to have a bank account, it felt like a really great deal. Because in order to get your money, banks had to pay you an interest rate that was higher than the rate of inflation. So in the US, you're lucky if you get 2% interest on your bank account. But in Brazil, in 1990, people could get 2,000% or more. Money was growing in banks, which helped fuel inflation, which led President Collor to believe bank accounts were part of the problem. And here's where he went really, really wrong. He decided to freeze bank accounts, 80% of private assets, 80% of the money you have in your bank account, you can't take out. Now, Maria is telling me this, and my translator, Flavio Ferreira, was sitting in on our conversation, and he could no longer keep quiet. He remembers when the Minister of Finance made that announcement.
And I remember the day when she was on TV explaining that they were going to confiscate everybody's money. So next days, banks would not work. I remember the face of that woman. She had studied in the best schools, and she had been a professor at USP, and she was explaining to the nation, as an economist, why we need this to end inflation. We need the country to be, together with us. But I remember I looked at her and said, God, a government cannot do that. I mean, when a government does that, you lose people's respect.
Oh, it was terrible, wasn't it? It was terrible. So many people committed suicide, you know.
When you mess with people's money, it does not go well. The economy went off a cliff. President Collor was impeached. There was a new president, a new finance minister, and inflation went back up again. The Brazilian economy was at a low point, and it looked like there was nothing to be done to fix it.
This message comes from our sponsor, Wix. If every person in the U.S. suddenly visited your website, would it crash? Not if it was built on Wix. That's because Wix's multi-cloud hosting gives you the unified power of AWS, Google Cloud, Fastly, and its own exclusive data centers. Wix processes 3.8 billion requests daily and can handle significantly more than this. Your site infrastructure automatically scales in response to traffic and transaction spikes. So think big. Wix can handle it.
Enter our heroes, those 4 economists we talked about at the beginning, who basically entered the picture now because that new finance minister knew nothing about economics. And so, in March of 1993, he called one of our heroes Edmar Basha.
Oh, I was in my office at that university here, the Catholic University, and I got a call soon after I had finished teaching a class, you know. And he said, I've just been named the finance minister. You know that I don't know any economics. So please come to meet me in Brasilia tomorrow. We need you. Well, I was terrified.
Basha had been waiting 3 decades for this call, ever since he and his 3 friends had taught graduate school together at the prestigious Catholic University in Rio. 4 friends who had been studying Brazilian inflation for decades, 4 buddies at the campus bar complaining to each other about how this government didn't know what it was doing and that government didn't know what it was doing. 4 buddies who were now being asked by the government to come and fix things their way, the plan they'd spent years on. And so, of course, their first answer, no, we don't want to. Here's another one of the 4, Andre Lara.
This is a process. It's something that requires many years. It's not something that we can do. It's not a magic. It's not a trick that we do overnight.
The government pressed on. Lara and Basha were taken to dinner with members of parliament who told them how much the country really needed them. They got calls at home. Senators told them, you will have free reign, whatever you think is best. Basha was invited to meet the president.
And then I asked him an autograph for my kids. And then he wrote a note for it, addressed to my 2 kids and saying, please tell your father to work fast for the benefit of the country.
That's what he wrote in the autograph?
Yes, I still have that note.
So there was a lot of pressure.
Oh, yes.
Basha was eventually won over by the autograph and the finance minister's appeals. And Lara was convinced by a parliamentary dinner where the politicians assured him they'd take whatever difficult measures were needed to keep his idea pure. So here was the idea. Basically, the 4 economists said, yes, you have to hit the underlying causes of inflation. You have to stop creating money. But you also have to stabilize people's faith in money itself. And this is where their plan was different. People were part of the problem, they thought. Their perceptions. People had to be tricked into thinking money had value when all signs told them that was absolutely not true. So Basha says they wrote a plan for a new currency, one that was stable, dependable, trustworthy. The only catch was this currency would not be real. It would not be printed. There would never be coins. It was fake. They called it a virtual currency.
We call the unit of real value, URV, yes. Yeah, it was a virtue. It didn't exist, in fact.
People would still have and use cruceros, the local currency, but everything would be listed in URVs. Your wages would be listed in URVs, taxes were listed in URVs, and all prices in the stores were listed in URVs. And URVs would be held stable. And so, for example, when you went to the store and bought some milk,
How much does it cost? I say, well, now it costs X, let's say 1 URV. Well, how much is that? Because I cannot pay without URV. So, well, I have this little table here, and today's value of URV in Cruzeiros is 7 Cruzeiros per URV. So it costs 1 URV, 7 Cruzeiros. You pay 7 Cruzeiros. You go next week, well, it's still 1 URV. But then you say, how many Cruzeiros? You look, well, it's 14.
Every night, the central bank would put out a memo with the official inflation rate of the day, and it would get printed in the newspaper the next morning, so the store clerk could look it up. Monday, 1 URV is equal to 7 Cruzeiros, Tuesday, 12 Cruzeiros, Wednesday, 14. Milk or whatever it was you were buying would stay the same in URVs. And the idea was you would start thinking in the fake currency, in URVs, because just last week you got paid 1,000 URVs. Milk costs 1 URV. Next month you get 1,000 URVs again, and milk would still be 1 URV. The amount of cruceros, what you actually handed to the clerk, would change, but the price in URVs would not. That was the plan, which Basha presented to the senator from Sao Paulo.
And then when I explained to him the plan, he, after a while, he said, well, with some anguish in his voice, said, well, Basha, if this is the only way that you tell me that it can be done, then we will follow you to the precipice.
And so the 4 economists went about explaining to the country that everyone now should talk in a virtual currency.
We didn't understand what it was. We asked, how much is that? Oh, so many URVs. I used to say it was a fantasy because it was not real.
Still, people used it without being forced to. One store would be selling milk for 1 URV, and eventually all the stores would be. So people would know that's an appropriate price for milk, which I can tell because I got paid 1,000 URVs.
And then when we are satisfied that prices were relatively in good synchrony, we declare, well, from this day, the virtual currency becomes a real currency. The Cruzeiro Real is going to disappear, and everyone is going to receive from now on its wages and pay for all the prices in the new currency, which is the real, which is equal to 1 URV and also equals to $1. And that is the trick.
It wasn't the only trick, obviously. While they put URVs in place, the group of economists made the government balance its budget and slow down on money creation. And then, one day, July 1st, 1994, the central bank deployed truckloads of new cash in this new currency, the real, to banks in the cities, to provinces, and waited on the ready for the four economists to say, go. All that fake money you've been using, it's now real.
And I remember, the day that we launched in the real, I have this journalist who had become a friend of mine, and then she came to me and said, "Professor, do you swear that inflation is going to end tomorrow?" I said, "Yes, I swear that's going to end tomorrow."
Everybody was very happy.
Our four heroes literally turned Brazil's economy in the opposite direction with their plan. Brazil was finally able to grow in the way it always should have been all along. The country was able to grow true competitive industries, huge players in sugar and oil and iron ore. And Cardoso, the finance minister who hired our four heroes, after admitting he knew nothing about economics, he was elected president twice.
That was Hannah Jaffe-Walt back in 2010, and we will be back after a short break to slow walk through exactly how these economists solved the problem of hyperinflation in Brazil.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Appian. Appian helps businesses manage change with a unified low-code platform. Use the Appian platform to discover, design, and automate workflows to accelerate your business. Market leaders globally across all industries trust Appian to deliver exceptional customer experiences, increase operational efficiencies, and enhance governance, risk, and compliance. More information is available at appian.com.
Okay, we are back with our economists extraordinaire, Luigi and Kristen. What did you guys think? What went through your head while you were listening to this story?
It takes me back to when I was working on my master's degree. I worked at Circuit City, which has now gone on. But one of the things that was our job on Saturday or Sunday, one of those days, we would update the prices. It wasn't about inflation.
You were the pricing person.
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
So it wasn't drastic swings. It was just based on whatever the price was. Some of the prices of televisions or stereos or whatever it was would go up or down. And there would be customers, if they were in the store at the time of the price change, they may want to make a purchase before the price went up, or they may want to wait to see if it went down.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a less fraught version of price changing than we saw in the grocery store, but it's the same thing, right? It's people who want to make sure they're getting the best deal. And in the case of Brazil, when we heard that sort of price changing was just very emotional. It came with a lot of panic and a lot of fear. And that was really part of what these four Brazilian economists were up against.
I think that the cleverness of these four guys, because it's pretty clear for the episode that in order to bring down inflation and to stabilize the price level, you need to intervene on the money printing, but at the same time, you need to change the expectations. And changing the expectations is something that we don't really know how to do as an economist. In a sense, you have this concept of rational expectation that people should behave like we think the model behaves. That's not really what happens in the world. You need to make something credible. And this is where psychology comes into picture. And ironically, these four economists were very good empirical psychologists at the same time as they were doing the right thing economically. Because in the episode, there was one of the four economists that said, that was asked by a friend, can you promise that inflation will not go up? And he said, yes, I promise.
Yes, that is such a striking moment.
Yeah, because I actually hold promises in very high regard. I only promise what I know I can deliver 100%. And I think he promised when he knew he could deliver maybe 98%. And it worked. But 2% of the time, you're really a bastard.
So I'd love to kind of like do a little bit of a slow walk through what happened here. So these economists, they make up a currency. They peg the Brazilian currency to this currency that they say is made up. It doesn't exist. How did this work?
Yeah, so I think it's like they talked about in the episode the price of milk, for instance.
Yeah.
Right? That if milk costs 1 UVI, right? That each time you go to the store, day after day, week after week, it's 1 UVI. So you feel like the price isn't changing. Okay, things are stabilizing, right? So everything has a UVI price. But I guess it's interesting to me because the amount of currency that you actually have to turn over is changing.
Yes. So it's basically like the going to the grocery store, because Kristen, you mentioned like milk. Every time it's 1 UVI. And that's such a contrast to the opening scene where this guy is like basically speed walking down the aisles, changing all the prices, where the price is changing. It creates stability, even if that stability is fake. It's like a fake stability.
I think they set the expectation differently. You need to converge. If this is a need to coordinate, because if I am the only one not rushing to buy the good tomorrow and everybody else does, I basically get my value depreciated, my money depreciated, and you don't. So in fear that you are running and I'm not, I'm going to run myself. And that's a situation that is very dangerous, because everybody say, okay, I believe it when I see it happening, but before I'm going to rush and buy my stuff. The moment you see that actually the other people are coming down, it is a bit like in the famous Frank Capra that you see the run to the bank.
I've never really seen one, but that's got all the earmarks of being a run.
Oh yeah, It's a Wonderful Life. It's a Wonderful Life. It's such an amazing movie. And yeah, there's a moment in the movie where there's this everybody's panicking and they run into this bank and they're all trying to get their money out right away. They're panicking.
But George, I got my money here. You're thinking of this place all wrong, as if I had the money back in a safe. The money's not here.
Like the money's in your house, in your house, in yours, yeah.
And in the Kennedy house, and Mrs. Maitland's house, and 100 others.
Exactly. And that helps calm down people. And it's not easy to do it, even in a small town. What's the name of the town?
Bedford Falls.
It's not even easy to do in Bedford Falls, but in a country as large and diverse as Brazil, you really find it hard for anybody to believe anybody else.
Yeah, I think that people want to believe, they want to know that money is going to be stable, that their earnings are going to be able to buy the amount of goods and services that they expect, and that their accumulated wealth is going to continue to be worth whatever it's worth over time. People don't want to know that the money that they worked for or the wealth that they accumulated is going to be able to buy less in the future. That's not a comfortable thought. And inflation does erode the value of dollars, right? So people want to know that their money is going to hold some value, whether it's for retirement, whether it's for buying things in the future. They don't want to think that they've done all of this work and saved all of this money and that the money is going to be worthless.
All right, everybody, we are almost to the end of class. Time to go over our vocabulary and our concepts. Remember, there is a test at the end of summer school, and if you pass, you will get a genuine diploma. Can't put a price on that. So we have got inflation. The definition of inflation is just prices rising across an economy. There's also the wage price spiral. That is when prices rise and then people demand higher pay to pay those higher prices, and then companies raise their prices to be able to afford those higher wages, and up and up and up. There is hyperinflation, and that is when prices are rising by more than 1,000% a year. Before I let you guys go, we have our Spotify playlist, Econ Songs for the Summer. Are there any songs that came into your mind as you were listening to this tale of prices and inflation and policy change?
I'm trying to think that there is an Italian song of somebody going to the beach and paying always higher and higher prices for everything and couldn't afford to do it. Because unlike Christina, I'm much older, so I do remember the time of two-digit inflation in Italy, and that was a pain.
Oh, it looks like we found the song. It's called A mi piace il mare, or I like the sea. It's a song from 1969 about prices rising. They especially talk about the price of ice cream rising. Apparently it went from 100 lira to 1,000 lira.